Good morning to everyone. The event will begin shortly. May we invite everyone to have their seats while we wait for our guest of honor. Thank you again for setting aside time on a Saturday morning like this. It's very precious. To join us in the Malay Heritage Foundation, or MHF for short, in this program called Sembang Ilmu Plus Plus. I am Liana, and before we begin, allow me to go over some admin details. Although the safe distancing measures have been eased, we would like to retain some of it. Please ensure that you have your mask on at all times throughout the event. We have placed some mics on the stand in this chamber, and later, if you have questions during the discussion, you may go to the mic and ask. And also, we have mic rovers to pass you the mics also. If you need to be unmasked for whatever reasons, please ensure that you keep at least 1 meter safe distance from the next person. And also, we would like to request you to turn off your phones or keep them on silent mode. Feel free to take photos during the event and upload them onto your social media with the hashtags you see on the screen here. You can't record the event though, but the program will be streamed live on MHS, Facebook, and also YouTube. So while we wait for the guests of honor to arrive, please enjoy the music and yeah, have fun. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome our guest of honor, Mr. Edmund Tong, Minister for the Ministry for Community, Culture and Youth, and Second Minister for Law. Welcome Minister, Dr. Noor Sharil, Chairman MHF, Board of Directors, Madam Rahayu Buang, Deputy Chair MHF Board of Directors, other MHF Board of Directors, Mr. Lim Hock Chuan, Director of Programs for Temasek Foundation, Prof. Hadijah Rahmat, that I see over there, our partners, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Liana and I will be your host for today. Welcome to today's event. A good morning also to those joining us on Facebook and YouTube. Welcome to the launch of Sembang Ilmu Plus Plus, a new initiative by the Malay Heritage Foundation. This venue is indeed very special as it is where much of our history and legacy was made. And today marks another historical milestone in our nation-building process where we will have the opportunity to hear ideas and perspectives from our younger generation and also on how our arts and cultural heritage can be an important bridge and social glue to foster deeper understanding and cohesion among Singaporeans. But before that, let's treat ourselves with some pleasing melodies inspired from poetry. It is my pleasure now to invite Akmal and Fasola to open the floor of this chamber. Welcome Akmal and Fasola.
Kebanggaan yang hilang. Dalam jalanan yang panjang, anak-anak masa sering kecundang. Dari kehampaan yang menikam-nikam, kegembiraan yang terpendam, tenggelam bersama wajah suram. Kebanggaan yang pernah mengisi diri, menyanjung kejayaan remaja, meniti pelangi. Terjelma dari gumpalan hasrat dan aspirasi, ikatan tekad dan budi hilang ditelan kecelaan pekerti. Kemana irama lagu ilmu, lambang nilai murni. Dari irama lagu ilmu terpancar nada remaja membelah waktu. Dari petikan kecapi budi tergambar ketandusan nilai tradisi, tercela ilmu yang tinggi, dek budi yang tak murni. Maka terhapuslah sanjungan, hilanglah kebanggaan. Terima kasih. Now I'd like to present Hidayat Nordin and also Faris Awesome on the keys from Fasola. Round of applause for them. Thank you very much.
Kita telah sama-sama
membohongi diri
dengan ucapan lidah masing-masing,
kita telah sama-sama
mencantumkan lidah-lidah kita
yang sering bercakaran
dengan bahasa hati yang berlainan.
Ini bukan bererti
Aku menuntut kemenangan,
atau sedang menghadapi kekalahan.
cuma pendakian yang tinggi ini
Menjadi titik persoalan diri
yang menyebabkan kita bergelimpangan,
di sudut lerengnya,
atau kita dalam saat
perjalanan yang genting.
terus mendaki dengan bekal sehari,
Andainya lidah-lidah kita
tidak lagi bergeseran,
sesungguhnya kita bukanlah pembunuh
yang menemui pembunuhan
dan tertuduh membunuh.
Kita
Kita
telah sama-sama membohongi
diri dengan ucapan lidah masing-masing.
Kita telah sama-sama mencantumkan lidah-lidah kita yang sering bercakaran dengan bahasa hati yang berlainan.
Ini
Ini bukan bererti aku menuntut kemenangan
atau sedang
menghadapi menuntut kekalahan. Cuma pendakian yang tinggi ini menjadi titik persoalan diri yang menyebabkan kita bergelimpangan
di sudut
lerengnya, atau kita dalam saat perjalanan yang genting terus mendaki dengan bekal sehari, andainya lidah-lidah kita tidak lagi bergeseran. Sesungguhnya kita bukanlah pembunuh
yang
menemui pembunuhan dan tertuduh membunuh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Akmal and Fasola, for the beautiful renditions of two poems. The first poem is entitled Kebanggaan Yang Hilang, or in English means The Lost Pride, by the late Aliman Hassan, an educator, painter, writer, and cultural icon. The second song was inspired from the poem Lidah Lidah, referring to tongues, by A. Kadir Pandi, a former journalist. Ladies and gentlemen, as mentioned earlier, today marks another important milestone in MHF's efforts to engage and empower our youth that we see here today, and connects them to their cultural heritage. To find out more about how it all started out, it is my pleasure to invite Madam Rahayu Buang, Deputy Chair of the Malay Heritage Foundation Board of Directors, to deliver her opening remarks. Madam Rahayu, please.
Mr. Edwin Tong, Minister for Culture, Community and Youth, and Second Minister for Law. Dr. Nur Sharil Saad, Chairman of the Malay Heritage Foundation Board, and my fellow board members. Mr. Lim Hock Chuan, Head of Programs, Temasek Foundation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to everyone who have chosen to spend your Saturday morning with us, both presently here in this room, as well as those that are engaging with us online on our Facebook and YouTube. Special thanks also to Minister Edwin Tong for setting aside your time to be with us for the launch of Sembang Ilmu Plus this morning. In the various work that we do to promote and safeguard our shared heritage, it is important to include the views and perspectives of our youth in the conversations. After all, they are our future stalwarts and agents for social change and progress. The Malay Heritage Foundation started the youth-led Sembang Ilmu seminar series in March 2020. Sembang Ilmu, or roughly translated in English to mean let's chill and chat, is done in collaboration with the Malay Studies Society in the National University of Singapore. Sembang Ilmu is a discursive platform to facilitate discourse and the sharing of knowledge, wisdom pertaining to the Malay cultural performances, beliefs, social practices, norms, rituals, and social rules. Undeterred by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, which happened to be at the time when we were launching the Sembang Ilmu, the youth involved in the Sembang Ilmu organization continued with the seminars, pivoting them instead on online platforms. Between March 2020 and September 2021, more than 120 Malay youth had participated. And this year, in 2022, Sembang Ilmu is now on our third run, with 2 sessions already conducted in March and in May. We are encouraged by our youth collaborators' positive feedback and enthusiasm. In fact, we feel that such discourses would be even richer if we bring youth from diverse backgrounds together to have conversations that can foster a deeper understanding and appreciation of both individual and shared cultural heritage. And hence, the idea of Sembang Ilmu Plus was born. The Malay Heritage Foundation hopes that this new initiative will widen the circle of youth engagement in heritage matters and contribute towards strengthening our multicultural social fabric. 2 of the most innovative, engaging, and meaningful project ideas that come up from Sembang Ilmu Plus will be selected, and seed funding will be provided for the groups to turn their ideas into reality. On this point, I would like to say a big thank you to Temasek Foundation for believing in our vision and generously supporting the Sembang Ilmu Plus project. Thank you. As the African proverb says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We want to go far and deep in preserving and growing our shared heritage. Hence, the efforts of promoting and preserving culture cannot be done alone. True to the Gotong Royong spirit, we are also grateful to our community partners who have rallied their volunteers, students, and youth in organizing today's event. A special shout out to PAT PM, or the Malay Youth Literary Association, People's Association, Catholic Junior College, ITE Colleges Central, West and East, LaSalle College of the Arts, Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts, Nanyang Technological University, Raffles Institution, Singapore Management University, and of course the Singapore University of Technology and Design. Thank you for coming together, and we hope this will be a start to something bigger. I would also like to extend our thanks to the incredible lineup of speakers, Dr. Mark Nair, Dr. Noramin Farid, Dr. Wong Chi Meng, and our very own first Tunas Warisan Award recipient, Ms. Shaza Ishaq. Coming from diverse artistic and cultural backgrounds, all of them had readily agreed to come on board to share their knowledge and insights today. So to everyone, both physically present here and joining us on our online platforms, we hope this morning will be an intellectually stimulating and enriching experience for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Rahayu, for those insights. Personally, I am moved by her mention of gotong royong. Although it's a Malay term, but gotong royong also mean that, you know, everyone come together despite your background, despite your gender, despite everything, to come together and do something, yeah? And also, I think we are also excited to hear from our panel later. But before that, we would like to invite our Minister, Mr. Edwin Tong, to deliver his speech. Minister, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Rahayu. That was a wonderful speech, touched on all the key points, and I totally agree with everything you have said. So maybe I don't have to make my speech now. Dr. Noshairil Saad, Chairman, Malay Heritage Foundation, board members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and I think a special shout out to our young people today in the auditorium. Thank you very much for spending your Saturday morning with us here. It is a real honor for me to be invited here this morning to share this session with you at the launch of the Sembang Ilmu ++. This, of course, is being launched at a site venue of significant historical value. Just look around you, you can almost feel the history, the rich heritage, and how much of Singapore was developed, conceived of, thought of, and developed here in Singapore, in this chamber. This is where earlier generations of so many parliamentarians who have come before us debated on policies which made Singapore special, made Singapore stand out in ASEAN and in the world, and I think has formed the foundations of who we are and indeed where we are today in the world. And I'm very glad that in this chamber, our young people can, first of all, have that little bit of that vibe as you debate, talk about, exchange ideas, and think about the issues that confront us tomorrow. The topic of today's session is Art in and for Society, Youth Perspectives. Like this, Rahayu said earlier, this is a very timely topic to discuss. We have been, as a country, largely successful in building our foundations. When you talk about our early days, policies debated in this chamber on healthcare, on defense, housing, education, making sure that Singapore has a roof for everyone, has a place for everyone. I think when you look at the challenges of tomorrow, it will be still bread and butter issues, but I think the secret sauce ingredient for us to take the country forward will be in a common mindshare, in a shared heart, and building a strong, inclusive Singapore, not just as a slogan, but one where we truly mean everyone has a place in Singapore. Today, we are also facing divides from outside Singapore, maybe also within our society. Our polarized world has many of these fault lines, which people sometimes, for some reason, take pleasure in trying to divide, trying to press on those fault lines to accentuate differences rather than to focus on commonalities. Race and religion have sometimes become a fertile ground for such activity, to focus on the individual, focus on the me versus the we. Different stresses and pressures from trends such as social media has been a driving factor powering these divides. And these are challenges that we must overcome. And I think, again, to borrow very much from Rahayu's speech, we go far because we go together. So we have to do it together. And to me, the key topic today must be centered around how we develop a common strength, common identity, one that despite our race, our religion, our language, we can say we are truly Singaporean. And in this regard, I believe that in strengthening our collective identity, the arts provides us with a strong common denominator. Arts can appeal to us, whatever background, whatever form, whatever language. I could not understand the poem earlier because it was spoken in Malay, but I appreciated the value of it being delivered and the facial expressions and how the artist resonated with the audience here. Each of us, of course, have very different perspectives on art. I think when you look at a piece of art, it relates to some, but not to all. But by sharing our experiences in art, and I also say through art, not just in, but through the platform of art, artifacts, historical value, all of this can help us better understand one another. When I was at the Vatican a few months ago, I looked at the Vatican Museum and I thought that the Vatican Museum will be a place where it's all predominantly Christian artifacts. I was totally wrong. It was a Vatican Museum that has artifacts from so many different religions. And when I went through it, although very quickly, the one thing that struck me was the amount of commonality that you can see in these artifacts, in these items of religious and historical significance, the commonality between the major religions in the world, whether it's Christians, Catholics, Judaism, Buddhists, Hindus, there's so much commonality in all of them. And because the world we live in today is a challenging place, and because there are fault lines that tend to be accentuated today, we have to be a lot more resilient and a lot more united in our approach. Platforms like this, Sembang Ilmu ++, provides a very, very important foundation for developing that common understanding. We had the seminar earlier, which means Sembang Ilmu seminar, which means to chat, chill or chat, I think as Rahayu says, as a platform for youths to come together to discuss matters relating to arts, heritage, social, cultural history of the Malay community. Now, Sembang Ilmu ++ aims to reach out to youths from various walks of life, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of background, social economic status, and so on, for the next 2 years. Our discussions here, which we will kickstart this morning, will contextualize the discussion that we will have for the coming 2 years. These discussions will deal with intrinsic values that matter to us as Singaporeans, and as we share our home called Singapore. I'm very confident that young people today, and I look around the room, I think I'm very much past the average age in this room, which is a good thing, that you will grasp the future and you will hold that in your hand and you will understand that what you do, how you do it, and the leadership that you as young leaders show will matter tremendously to the future of this country. That is a very, very important platform on which we move forward as a country. The question for me today, as I reflected on the topics that are being discussed, is how do we bring people together? How do we ensure that we create a space not just to talk and dialogue, but more importantly, to act on, to further, to take these ideas and then find ways in which we can advance them, not just by speaking, but also by positive action. So one of the things I like to see in this series of dialogues is not just ideas, but how we can implement those ideas, working with government, working amongst yourselves in civil society, working with the groups of young people through ground-up initiatives. In many ways today, I think the sky is the limit. So think of it not just as an idea or as a seed, but how do we plant it, make it grow, fertilize it, and make it into a tree for tomorrow's Singapore. Today, we'll be hearing from very distinguished speakers, Dr. Shaza Ishak, Dr. Amin Farid, Dr. Mark Nair, and of course Dr. Wong Chi Ming. And I wanted to start by thanking all of you for spending your time here. In every discourse and indeed every society, as we try to chart our way forward, we need people who can inspire, can mentor. And I think all four of you have put forward your time, put aside time this weekend to do precisely that, to share your experiences, to engage in an intellectual dialogue, to share experiences, and to understand from your perspective how art, heritage, culture can be a common denominator that will take us forward. All of you, I believe, will have very interesting, unique stories to share, not just about your own successes, but perhaps more importantly also of the various challenges that you have faced. Stories about how you've overcome that challenge and now come to where you are, successful in your own right, will be very inspiring. And will tell our young people as they chart that path, that indeed, cliche as it may sound, where there is a will, there is a way, and we can overcome it. Finally, as I end off, I'd like to turn to MHF, Heritage Foundation, and thank you all for taking the effort to organize this platform. As we come out of COVID and get back into organized events and share at a forum like this, I think it's all the more important that we come in person on a platform like this to do this sharing. We could have done this on Zoom, and that must have been the case 1-2 years ago, but I think it would not have been the same. When we talk about building mindshare, making sure that we exchange thought leadership, share ideas, and chart a path forward that not just do we all agree on as a matter of policy, but also as a matter of heart. I think the best is to do it in person. So thank you very much, Malay Heritage Foundation, for giving us this platform. Thank you very much, Temasek Foundation, for your unwavering belief in what Malay Heritage Foundation does through these platforms and supporting these platforms. And I hope that there will certainly be more organizations from the corporate sector, from the civil society, from anywhere in community, who will come forward to support these initiatives. As I said, and as Madam Rahayu also said, we can't do it alone, we can't go alone. And it's not just a government effort, it's not just a civil society effort, it's got to be an all-of-society effort for us to take Singapore beyond the next SG100 and beyond. So on this, I have the privilege of declaring Sembang Ilmu Plus Plus officially open and launched, and I look forward to many meaningful dialogues, constructive ideas, and a deep exchange of not just ideas, but also of friendship. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, for those inspiring words and officially launching Sembang Ilmu Plus Plus. Now, I'm sure we are all eager for the highlight of today's program, which is the Sembang Ilmu session, where we start discussing, we hear first the presentations by our speakers, and then we will go to discussion. So I think now, we already know Sembang means to chat, right? And ilmu, I think people forget that part. Ilmu means knowledge, right? So knowledge, we always think that, we have to sit in a very serious setting, in school and etc. But Sembang Ilmu tells us that, you can chat about knowledge and have a more open and casual discussion around it, right? Okay, so today, the first speaker we have is Dr. Mark Nair. He's no stranger to the art scene in Singapore. He's a prolific poet and photographer who has published 10 volumes of poetry. In 2016, he received the Young Artist Award in recognition for his contribution to the arts and literary scene in Singapore. Today, he will be sharing a presentation titled I'll Be Your Mirror, the Artist in Society, to reflect on the purpose, function, and value of art and the artists in Singapore. Please put our hands together to welcome Dr. Mark Nair.
Good morning, and thank you. It's really an honor to be here at the launch of Sembang Ilmu Plus. You know, whenever I travel overseas, people I would strike up a conversation with, whether at the airport or during my trip, would naturally ask what I do. At this point, I usually pause. I could say I'm a teacher, a writer, a photographer, a producer, all legitimate professions I've worked at or currently work in. But sometimes I say I write poetry, because that is far more interesting in terms of what happens next. Usually they want to read my work somewhere online, or they ask where they can buy my books, and I'm more than happy to share. In fact, last year, I was in transit in Hong Kong on my way to the US, and because the directions were so confusing, I got talking to someone so that we could figure it out. Long story short, when we stepped off the plane in SF, I had written a poem about the brief conversation we had. It was a poem about travel, about liminal spaces and the transit lounge of the pandemic. Maybe it's about being elsewhere, but poetry has that simple power to speak to individual lives, to reflect and put a finger gently on the pulse of a moment. However, if I am asked that same question in Singapore, I rarely respond with poet. Why? Because the first thing that people will say is, huh? Poet? Really? Can earn a living? How many books you sell? Singapore got people read poetry? And the answer is usually that poetry sits in an adjacent space to everything else I do. It is as important. It's the sidecar on my scooter. Will I be able to function without it? Sure. Is it aesthetic? Yeah. What benefits do I get from a sidecar? I do get quite a lot of benefits, actually. But no analogy is perfect. But poetry remains a channel for me, something that is outside the need to commodify or place a monetary value on everything. Mark Yakic, a poet and professor at Loyola University, has offered this notion. Like no other book, a book of poems presents itself not as a thing for the marketplace, but as a thing for its own sake. So immediately the poet sits outside the governing ethos of our insatiable consumerist lifestyles, and perhaps that could be extended to the artist and the artist's place in society. Well, what do I mean by that? Let me begin with a digression on the topic for today, art for/in society. We need to perhaps deconstruct this seemingly innocuous phrase to better understand our position as artists and supporters of the art in Singapore. So, a definition. What is art? Art is a process by which human beings express an idea or emotion through a diverse range of activities that create artifacts across a range of mediums. It involves imaginative or technical skills stemming from human agency and creation, which is filtered through personal experience and set against a broader cultural context, which often reflects the human condition. And I suppose this leads us to the /for/in. The slash intrigues me. Why this slash? Is it a mutually exchangeable site of discourse, for/in? One implies that society is the endpoint of artistic creation and expression. The other implicates the world that the art is made in. And society is a general, almost generic word. We don't have one society anymore. We are tribes, split by interest, by political will, by age, by faith, by online and offline interactions. The role, work, and purpose of art is different for each of these groups. It is too simplistic to think of society as a cogent whole. It would be better for us to realize that in an age of digital integration, we are more apart than ever. This has been aggravated by, but not solely caused by, the pandemic. As a society, we have been practicing social distancing in various forms for a long time. But I want to reinforce the importance of the artist as a work in progress, as a dirty mirror. We would like a clean mirror, of course, a polished surface that reflects all the merits of society, a mirror that is not cracked or stained, a mirror that could even come with a money-back guarantee, which does take us back to the fundamental question: what is art? The idea of art and the label of artist is very broad today. Indeed, anyone who says they are an artist is an artist. But what kind of art do you produce, I ask? And more importantly, why do you produce it? Do artists see themselves as creating for the sake of creation, for aesthetic experience or contemplation, for beauty, or because you want to mint an NFT and make $1 million by the time you're 18? Again, these are noble, aspirational goals, but they will come up, as they always have, against the economic imperative to produce something of value, something marketable, which is in a way synonymous with our country. We are Singapore Incorporated. We have a product to sell, a brand to protect. Rohini Singh, assistant professor of communication studies at the College of Worcester, writes that by constructing the nation as bound by economic concerns rather than socio-political ones, Singapore is engaging in neoliberal rhetoric. Neoliberalism is a philosophy that attempts to apply the logic of the market to other institutions, such as the government. In other words, under neoliberalism, governments are seen as offering a product or service to the citizens, and citizens are treated as shareholders in a corporate nation. If this is so, we must think about the place and purpose of art and artists in an economically driven nation. Do artists also need KPIs? Do artists also need to upgrade their artistic practice every year? Should they be creating larger and larger works, publishing more and more books? Of course not. Art isn't a numbers game. In fact, art is meant as a cohesive force for good in society. And yet, corporate patronage remains low. Rates for teaching artists have not risen much over the years. And the number of students taking literature in schools continue to fall. But still, we churn out arts management students from tertiary institutions. And the question is, how many go on to work in the arts industry? How many do we need? What's the ratio of arts managers to artists? More critically, how many artists can afford to practice full-time? So many, and I speak from personal experience, so many artists engage with the arts adjacent to their bread and butter jobs, whether it's in teaching or something else. The NAC is preparing to launch the SG Arts Plan 2.0, which will run from 2023 to 2027. And I've been involved in consultative sessions with them. The aim is how can we make the arts a fundamental part of our lives and advocate its value to our society. The various intended outcomes include sustaining access to the arts for everyone through their lives, building community through the arts, and driving interest in and advocacy for the arts. These are very good goals, but they still will come up against our neoliberal logic. And the question is, how do we work within this system? For me, I continue to write poetry. It is a response that does not seek to offer a didactic or moral conclusion, but it does broadly sit within film critic Emerson Goo's assertion that the continuity of human existence is renewed by and is contingent on a vernacular knowledge of nature. This ability to speak, think, and be in the language of nature is fundamental in situating ourselves within the natural world. It's not just about forests and oceans, but about lived relationships between people, a state of continued renewal in the fundamental beliefs of human nature. We are, after all, natural beings. Dana Cloud, a cultural theory professor, writes that words do things with us in systematic, power-laden, and economic ways. And poetry is that condensed ability to express thought that sits at the intersection of narrative, imagery, and personal expression. It emanates from society. It expresses who we are, how we are, and why we are. In doing research into folklore and traditional methods of healing and spiritual practice in the region, I read about Bukit Kasih, the Hill of Love, which is found in Manado, in North Sulawesi, Indonesia. It's more of a tourist attraction than anything, but it's also an important site for the Minahasa, the indigenous folk of the area. So on the top of Bukit Kasih are 5 houses of worship: a Catholic church, a Christian church, a Buddhist temple, a mosque, and a Hindu temple. While just beneath the peak, the faces of Toa and Lumimut ancestors of the Minahasa tribe, are carved into the hillside. Kase is rooted in the basic philosophical concept of Minahasa, which is called Tomu To, T-O-M-O-U, T-O-U, an attitude of mindfulness of oneself and a love of humanity and the surrounding environment. It is the idea of coexistence, of allowing space for art to dwell with and within us. And that is at the heart of Bukit Kaseh. Jeanette Winterson, one of my favorite authors, echoes this sentiment very well. What art does is to coax us away from the mechanical and toward the miraculous. The so-called uselessness of art is a clue to its transforming power. Art is not part of the machine. Art asks us to think differently, see differently, hear differently, and ultimately to act differently. And that is why art has moral force. Art reflects the hybrid identity present in all of us. We are not simply the product of economic process or KPIs. We are so much more than that. So in closing, I would like to leave you with homework. No, I'm kidding. It's just some questions. It's the teacher in me cannot let go of that. I'd like to leave you with some questions to think about when you next encounter a work of art. And this can be in any form. First of all, what happens when we experience a work of art? Can you articulate that? Secondly, what are your perceptual, emotional, and cognitive processes when we respond to art? Thirdly, what is common about your experiences across different forms of art, and what is distinct? And lastly, how can art be part of our identity? Now, these are big questions, but they are also questions that help us think a bit more critically by reflecting on what we see, so that we don't just consume at the surface level, but we learn to respond to what the artist and the work of art is saying. And finally, for the artists amongst us, let us dare to tell our countrymen, here, take my hands and hold me up to the light. I'll be your mirror. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nair. I think if we can take away some points from your presentation, being an artist is to be human. Art is a reflection of your experiences, of the society. So, you know, if people ask you, right, why are you studying art? Why do you want to become artist? Why do you want to produce art? In whatever forms it may be. It can be poetry, it can be visual art, it can be performative art. I think the common strand here is to be human and to have that universal love for one another, right? Okay, so next we have Dr. Amin Farid, who is a choreographer, arts educator, and Maritime Southeast Asian Performing Arts researcher. He is a recipient of the 2017 Singapore Youth Award and the 2018 India ASEAN Youth Awards. More recently, Dr. Amin curated an online portal, Arkitari, which documents maritime Southeast Asian dances. Let's welcome Dr. Amin to present his lecture titled Moving Bodies, Connecting Histories. Dr. Amin, please.
Very good morning, everyone. Actually, I'm quite sad. Do you want to ask me why? Okay, thank you for asking. I'm 36, so I'm no longer a youth. But I'm very happy to still possess the rigor and vigor of a youth, and to promote and to share a little bit about my culture with everyone today. Now, so my lecture is entitled Moving Bodies, Connecting Histories. Next slide. And as what Liana has just shared, my lecture will share a little bit about looking at histories and how this can foster intergenerational conversations. Next slide. Now, I would like to start the lecture by offering this shared space to a spectral presence. She has long been discarded and forgotten for all that she has given us. At one time, she was regarded as the queen of the floor. Later, she was seen as impure and unbecoming of a proper Malay lady. Today, via this GIF image, she graces us with her presence, reminding us that without her, we could not have come this far. As she wheels her limbs and moves her hips repeatedly, she emerges slowly from underneath the many negative connotations that have demeaned and belittled her all these years. Her mastery of movement, space, and power deserves recognition, for she has tolerated for far too long for her seat as her rightful place as the bearer of tradition of what we now call Malay dance. She is the Ronggeng girl, often known as the Penari Joget. The Ronggeng is a social dance practice, event, and tradition from the villages, which involve not only dancing between men and women, but also with live accompaniment from a group of musicians and singers who would sing, usually in a poetic prose known as the pantun. The Ronggeng troupe would consist of these multiple performers roving from one village to the other, providing much-needed entertainment in the rural areas of Malay archipelago. Because they will be traveling for months on end, it is common for these troops to seek temporary refuge in one village for weeks before moving to their next port of call in another village. Ronggeng troops attracted people from near and far, mostly men who would like to show and test their skill in dancing with a Ronggeng girl who is believed to have ample experience in outwitting her male counterparts in the art of dance. However, the squeals and joys in a boisterous Ronggeng event, the gathering of bodies to the rhythm of drums, and the exchange of poetry can never outweigh the burgeoning stigma that she must endure from jealous male patrons and their wives, and the cultural and religious elites who are beginning to frown upon the practice. Ultimately, she's not only the master of social dance, but also the master of withholding her many emotions as she navigates through the gossips and rumors of her virtue, as her community tries to make sense of their own place in a waning colonial environment, navigating tradition in modernity. This GIF is an excerpt from a film called Masyarakat Pincang, produced in 1958 by the Malay Film Productions. In this scene, in particular, the Ronggeng girl dressed in dark kebaya must deal with a very obnoxious patron who has been harassing her. This, of course, is a representation of a popular culture wherein the Ronggeng girl was a key figure of urban entertainment of the 1950s, especially in the Joget halls of urban entertainment parks such as Great World, New World, and Gay World. She sits on her designated chair every night with her fellow colleagues, waiting for patrons to come to buy a deck of tickets to hire her for her time. For every ticket she receives, she must dance with each of them individually for a duration of one song. The patron-dancer relationship on the dance floor provided a platform for creative and innovative styles of performance to emerge, especially when it is not within the convention of the Ronggeng to allow either party to be in contact with each other. It was common practice for the patron and dancer to dance around each other flirtatiously, moving back and forth with them in a weaving pattern. Often, she has no power to choose who her patrons are because she needs to collect as many tickets so that she will be able to exchange it with her boss to get her dues for the day. It is this taxi-like nature of hiring a dancer that some within the community regard her as an entertainer of men's desire. She is seen as a person of low status, impure, and disgrace. Now, I invoke the figure of the Ronggeng girl today as a means to show how an engagement of history provides us with a nuanced understanding of an artistic communal practice. Through her absence in official histories of Malay dance practice, we are made to wonder first about why she has been silenced. And in the efforts to recognize her in the 21st century, what must be done to help destigmatize her downtrodden image? Second, as an obvious agent of popular culture and also the subject of colonial economy that placed her in the lower rungs of society, what happens if we were to reposition her as a career woman and a key personality of pre-nation state creative industry, to use a very contemporary term? Most importantly, what is her role in the practice of what we understand today as a Malay dance? Now, the next slide. Just to share a little bit about how Ronggeng would look like, because the form that we practice today on stages is an art dance, is merely a representation. And this was a social dance scene back in the 50s to the 60s. Are you able to play the video? So she's telling the patron not to touch. Just to give you an idea of how the Ronggeng would look like. Thank you. Her spectral presence in this century's momentum to be inclusive of the diversity of identities and the energetic initiatives to decolonize, she becomes a marker of rejuvenation. Through her, we know that the transmission of a social dance tradition became popular culture. When Ronggeng became co-opted into Singapore's urban life, Singapore as a nation state, it became a cosmopolitan practice. That is, it's not exclusive only to a particular ethnic group. And this is something you hear a lot in oral history recordings of people of different racial backgrounds dancing with Ronggeng girls and how they enjoyed their experience dancing with them. And soon after, the Ronggeng as a practice became a key feature of community building, nation building, when after political rallies and government meetings, the Ronggeng is used as a way to garner community participation. So when her practice ceased, social dance became art dance. The Malay dance that we observe and participate in the 21st century Singapore is a mere representation of what was before. We depend on the nostalgia of aging veterans to transmit the values of an art form that was inherently social, dynamic, and eclectic. What happens if the memories of the social aspect of dance is lost with the preceding generation? Will mere documented descriptions and performed representations be sufficient? Now, I choose the Ronggeng girl as a case study to show some of the parallels and some of the issues that we go through within the Malay dance community. And I will highlight soon after some of the examples of which I've initiated to encourage discourse and also knowledge sharing. Next slide, please. So I would like to share about this group of mothers. They were dancers back in their youth. Next slide. And they started, this is a grassroots initiative, so they started their own group called Mak Mak Menari in 2012. And the reason for doing so was because they enjoyed to still dance, but because they are mature women, wives and mothers, so they felt that they couldn't go back to their previous groups because they would feel that it's going to be a very difficult time for them to catch up with the energetic and the energy of their younger counterparts. So what happened was they came together, and they came from many different groups within Singapore, and they decided to start this group. So what I did in 2020 was to collaborate with Mak Mak Menari to share their stories, and this was commissioned work by M1 Fringe Festival, where we shared a little bit through working collaboratively, we hear some of their stories and what do they go through. Now, the stigma of the Ronggeng girl is something that continues to live on because they themselves face this issue when they are seen sometimes as unbecoming of Malay lady, especially when they already have children, and some of them are also already the level of a grandmother. So they came together still because of their passion for dance. Next slide. Right, so this is just some footage, pictures from Mak Mak Menari, which premiered in 2020. The next slide. Now, we were talking about the Ronggeng, and I was very pleased that with the support from the National Arts Council, I was able to initiate a Ronggeng revival, and it's still in its first phase. Next slide. And we were looking at it as a ground sensing initiative, phase 1, where I worked together with some of my other counterparts within the scene. And I was very pleased that it was received quite well, because we had a lot of focus group discussions, not only with veteran dance practitioners, but also with musicians. Next slide. And so the objectives of the Ronggeng Revival Project in particular was to revive a social dance event known as the Ronggeng, and then to also revitalize and reinstate the integral bond between music and dance. And this is, of course, something that is quite sidelined. In the practice of Malay dance, we don't fully learn how to understand music, and this is something that I hope to bridge the gap in trying to encourage future generations understand that Malay dance is in fact encompassing performing arts form. And third, to innovate new models of performance presentation and to collaborate with artists, scholars, and activists. Next slide. So here, you see us during early this year having conversations with regards to the Ronggeng. Of course, this was not always a happy story. There were, of course, issues with the term Ronggeng itself. The stigma of it continues to live on within a particular generation. Interestingly, too, when we wanted to interview living Ronggeng girls, it was their children who actually did not allow us to do so because they did not wish for us to relive the past. But interestingly, it was their grandchildren that were willing to share the stories of their grandparents. Right? Next. And also with the musicians focus group. Next. And also adjacent arts, we also acknowledge that Ronggeng is not only for the dance and music art sectors, also to include conversations with scholars, theatre practitioners, and journalists as well. Next slide. Now, I was also very pleased to have started this online portal called Arkitari, which is an opportunity to share about maritime Southeast Asian performing arts form and to make knowledge about it accessible. Now, this has come to the fore because last year itself, I've noticed a heightened number of students who were eager to learn more about Malay dance, but felt that the knowledge that were present online was not encompassing. So through archetype, next slide. So it is like a one-stop site, next slide, to share, articles that were written not only by myself but also by other writers. One of them is our teman warisan, Miss Liana, who also, was very eager to share the relations between language and dance. Next slide. And we were looking at different other aspects also, because a lot of times when we talk about Malay dance, we keep talking about the aesthetics of it. Now, what's important here is to also look into the socio-cultural and historical elements of it, so that there is a nuance and deeper understanding of Malay dance. So here we looked at anatomy, language. Next slide. And of course, looking at evolution. The form is not a stagnant one. It continues to evolve, and it continues to evolve with its practitioners. And in closing, I would like to pay tribute again to the Ronggeng girl, who I hope will receive recognition as bearers of tradition. And today, I'm glad that the younger generation is willing to have the conversation to ask about her place and space today in the 21st century. And with that, I would like to pay tribute to just dance.
Thank you, Dr. Amin Farid. What an I cannot talk now, right? I see him dance, really I cannot talk. What an inspiring presentation, and also I hope through his sharing, it may inspire our youth here to think about the kind of projects, the kind of efforts that you like to champion on your own, right? So it doesn't take you to be a doctor or a learned person, of a certain academic background to start something. You can do something with the funding that's given, or your friends, or other community partners out there, right? Okay, right, so let's invite our next speaker, Dr. Wong Chi Ming, who's an independent scholar with a research interest in the practice and management of intangible heritage in multi-ethnic Singapore. He has authored a book on the historical and cultural memory of Kreta Ayer that re-examines the social construction of Chinatown in the relation to post-colonial identity and cultural diversity. Sorry, I have to flip this, it's too long. Okay, so in his presentation titled Learning to be Intercultural, Dr. Wong will share how do we speak of intercultural competence in Singapore. Let's welcome Dr. Wong.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy and honored to be here today, to be part of this panel, and to share a topic that is really close to my heart, because I happen to have written a whole thesis on the topic of intercultural dialogue, and I myself have over the years been involved in cultural practices across different ethnic identities, and sometimes I feel very exasperated because It's like everything in Singapore, all the institutions and all these disciplines seem to be segregated according to the C, the M, the I, and the O. And I feel like I'm a spare part that may fit in everywhere or nowhere. So today I'm going to take this opportunity to talk to you about my understanding of intercultural awareness. Next slide. And I'm going to talk about the importance of intercultural awareness for social harmony, and I'm going to talk about two different concepts of intercultural learning, one that focuses on managing cultural differences and one that focuses on the universal value in arts and culture. Next. So perhaps a lot of Singaporeans may think like we are doing fine as a multiracial society. Like, why do we need to talk about intercultural? Well, personally, I don't even like to use the word race so much because of its association with biogenetic features. I like to think of cultures and heritages instead, because this should be something that empowers us and not put us into boxes. Next. In the past, the way to deal with cultural differences in Singapore seems to be one of tolerance. And for a lot of people, that means not talking about it if there is potential conflict. But I think perhaps social media has changed that, because you can no longer put a lid to all the things that are said out there. And someone has pointed out to me that our cultural minister has coined this term embracement as a way to deal with our differences. A lot of people may also point out that the CMIO does not cover all the diversity that we have in Singapore. Next. What the CMIO model is, basically, is a form of multiculturalism, which is the recognition and accommodation of the different needs among language groups and religious groups. Of course, we are also so differentiated, so there are different circumstances, like we have SEP schools for Chinese and English, but not for the other languages. But we are also aware that we are not a melting pot like America. In Europe, there's a different policy approach that's been termed intercultural dialogue. I'll go more into that later. And that often entails the idea of intercultural competence. Next. And intercultural competence basically refers to knowledge and skills that would help us deal with cultural groups beyond our own. So that may mean being flexible or being open-minded to other ways of life. What it means essentially in the field of intercultural communication is a form of intercultural learning, I would say. And that means acquiring awareness of cultural contexts that are subjective or relative, and thereby learn to interact more sensitively with other people. Next. And this cultural context would include cultural values, which may be embodied in cultural symbols or cultural practices. And the basic idea in such a model is that we learn to be more aware of these differences so that we don't get into a faux pas, we try to avoid misunderstanding, misinterpretation of others' intention and overreacting. Next. Well, I would say this model has actually its own limitations, because intercultural communication as a field happened to have actually been developed in America. And sometimes I feel that this model feels a bit like a superhero going from one universe to another. And the strategy here basically is that you try to be invisible. You don't want to be noticed, right? What you're doing is just to understand that there's a different set of rules in different places, which helps a lot if, let's say, you're going overseas for studies or for work for some years, because you can suspend your opinions on differences in moral values, right? But what if, like in the world of the superheroes, like different worlds collide? Next. And that was a challenge for European countries, especially as they face new waves of migrants, and especially after September 11th. So they came out with this idea. They don't want to call it assimilation, but they insist that there should be some form of open and respectful exchange to deal with differences before it escalates into conflicts. Next. So, if you talk about this idea of intercultural dialogue, what level are we at in Singapore? I'll just cite one example now. 2 years ago, a Straits Times reader pointed out that there was a Chinese children's book with a depiction of a dark-skinned school bully with curly hair. And so I was one of those people who discussed this issue on Facebook. And then I thought, that's not enough. So I decided to write a forum letter to the Chinese press. And I must admit, when I'm dealing with people of different language group, I'm acutely aware of differences, and I try to write in a way that will not offend the sensibilities of the different group. But the challenge is we do have a language barrier. So in this episode, I found out a lot of times we seem to be talking past each other. And the same goes with the issue of Chinese privilege, right? Not everybody would agree on what that term should mean and where we should go from there. Next. Now I jump to another episode, the brown-faced ad incident. A lot of you may react very negatively to that, but there are also Singaporeans who may not see immediately that there's anything fundamentally wrong with this. But if you ask me, I would say the problem is perhaps closer to one of cultural appropriation. What we see here is basically a Chinese actor who puts on the disguises of different ethnic costumes and even colors his skin. And that suggests that he's reducing different cultural identities to physical attributes. And at the end of the day, it's so clear that the whole thing revolves around the Chinese consumer, right? And everything else just objectified and secondary. Next. So I think the worst thing that can happen after such episodes is that we say, all right, to avoid conflict, we just move away from other groups. We don't try to do any thing that cuts across cultures to avoid misunderstanding, to avoid accusations of cultural appropriation. I think that would be a very unnecessary reaction. We live in a society, we grew up in what you may call rojak culture. Hybridity is very much part of that, right? We grew up speaking Singlish, phrases like, why are you so like that? And even the food we eat, for example, fish head curry, it came about naturally because the Chinese people who enjoyed eating fish head, and then there were Indian restaurants that could cook fish head with curry, and it was a hit. So you can't stop people from innovating. What may be problematic, of course, is, let's say there are restaurants that puts a label, Pranakan, and anything, and then suddenly the prices escalate, right? Then people go to talk about it. What does that really mean? Next. If you ask me for, let's say, some examples of best form of intercultural food in Singapore, I would cite the example of halal Chinese food. And I'm particularly appreciative when I think about this Malaysian movie, Sepet, because there was this scene where the Malay actress would walk into a Chinese coffee shop, and then she went like very disgusted look because she saw char siu, right? So how great is it that we can all share this dish just with slightly different versions, right? Of course, there's also like vegetarian version of the wonton noodle. I think the same would also go with languages. I happen to be Cantonese, and Cantonese in Singapore and Malaysia often use this word "soma," which actually means semua. Again, some people would go like, sounds very salah, right? But actually, there's also an attitude among some Chinese that, hey, we should keep our language pure. Like, we should speak Beijing Mandarin, or we should just erase non-Chinese words from Cantonese. But I think this is something that we should really accept. This form of hybridity is very much of our reality. Next. And from language, let's look at music as a universal language. Some of you might have seen performances by Faisal. He fell in love with the sounds of guzheng when he was a teenager, and since then he has started playing not only Chinese tunes, but also Malay and Indian tunes on the instrument. And to him, it's just an instrument like the guitar. You need not be bound by these categories or notions. And do we say that this is a form of cultural appropriation? But this guy spent a lot of time and effort in it. So it's something that we should acknowledge. Next. In fact, sometimes I feel that the problem in Singapore is that we are too spoiled for choices. We are a global city for the arts. We have all these performances and festivals that we can choose from, that we tend to forget a lot of later endeavors in our community. I once learned to play the sitar under the late Sharafa Kanji, and he would perform not only classical Hindustani music, but also incorporate tunes that were Malay, Chinese, or Bengali. And he even recorded a CD with us. So these are the later memories, I think, that we should avoid forgetting. Next. Now, if I go into the history of Indian classical dance in Singapore, intercultural dialogue or intercultural exchange was there right in the beginning. Back in the 50s, a lot of Chinese students in the middle schools would learn Malay or Indian dance. And the late Mrs. Shanta Bhaskar staged the Chinese folktale of Butterfly Lovers, recently restaged again, in Indian dance. And I happen to have also helped to compile the memoirs of her husband, Mr. K.B. Bhaskar. And there he shared a lot of interesting things about how Aneka Ragam Rakyat came about, and how there was actually also an Indian connection with the Malay film industry that we tend to forget. Next. So I won't have time to share my personal involvement in the Indian music and dance, but I would say that it's not all about just learning from a skill, right? Because I think that in Singapore, when you think about the arts and culture as a form of industry, we think about KPIs. We want to be able to measure something before we say, oh, right, this is something worth talking about. But to me, this was living a life. What I enjoyed was not just learning the dance itself, but making friends along the way and learning about other nuggets of culture beyond the art form, like just sharing dinners with my friends and talking about the latest Tamil movie songs, for example. So that it's a constant learning process. Next. So I would like to propose a second concept of intercultural learning, which is one that's centered on the appreciation of cultural values as embodied or as representing the diversity of cultural heritage in a city, a country, or a region. And that's something that may inspire further exchange and cooperation. Next. So for the last part of my presentation, I would like to invite you to maybe think along with me on how we can extend such idea of intercultural learning to physical heritage. So I will start with an example of a place that was one of the most beautiful places I have ever visited, and that is the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. So apparently when it was taken over by the Spaniards, who were Christian, in 1492, it was, of course, converted. So it was a time when even Jews would convert into Christianity. But they did not destroy everything that they saw because it was just too beautiful. Next. So let's look at something more humble but closer to home. Georgetown in Penang. Actually, the shop houses there, of course, bear a lot of resemblance with what we see here in Chinatown or other places. But in Chinatown, a lot of times we are too absorbed in the narratives about economic and urban development. So what we see represented a lot of times would be the coolies and the Samsung women, and so sometimes it feels almost like poverty porn. But actually there's so many stories that you can explore. And in the case of Georgetown, they have emphasized that the place is a living testimony to a multicultural heritage, with living cultures from music to dance to festivals and so on. Next. So can we maybe think about how we can explore other ways of interpreting the various old ethnic quarters in Singapore, Chinatown, Kampung Glam, Little India, or even other places in between, like the gay world that was mentioned. Next. So interculture is about a lot of things. It's not about erasing cultural differences. It's about respect. It's not about creating just a kind of product for the cultural industry. Next. And it's a dynamic process where we learn to share cultures and we celebrate our diversity in a way that's open-minded. And certainly key challenges would remain, like how we can build connections across those lines that we've been living with for the longest time, like the prescribed notion of the CMIO, which is something that we cannot totally dismiss, but we can keep fine-tuning it, and we can keep building networks to work together and live together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wong, for those interesting insights. And actually, Dr. Wong's title of his presentation is very relatable to the theme of this year's special project call for proposals, which I will announce later. But since we are at it, I'll announce now. It's Multicultural Singapore Beyond CMIO. So don't forget what Dr. Wong shared, because it's related to the call of proposals this year. All right, so we have our last speaker, MHF's first Tunas Warisan recipient, Ms. Shaza Ishak, the Managing Director of Theatre Eka Matra, a local theatre company established in 1988. Graduated with a Master of Arts in 2019 from the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama in UK. She believes in effecting social change through the art of storytelling on stage, and she believes in, expressing one's thoughts through drama, right? So today she'll be presenting her paper on arts philanthropy in ethnic minority communities. Ms. Shaza, please.
Hi. Madam Rahayu, you mentioned that Sembang Ilmu is chill and chat, right? So I apologize in advance because my speech is not very chill, but we'll see. Good morning, distinguished guests. I'm Shaza Ishak, Managing Director of Theatre Eka Matra, an ethnic minority theatre company based here in Singapore. I've been running the company for over a decade, and only in 2018, which was our 30th year of existence, did we run our first ever fundraising campaign, which raised all of $4,000. In the years after, I've been pretty obsessed with philanthropy and fundraising, and I'm incredibly honored that I've been given this platform to share some of my thoughts, but mostly questions with you. And I'm so glad that I don't need to convince you that the arts is important. I mean, we are all at the Arts House quite early on a weekend at an event named Art and Heritage for and in Society, so I'm going to safely assume that I'm preaching to the choir. And if not, I believe that my esteemed colleagues who preceded me today have done a remarkable job to convince you. In fact, they've rejuvenated my love for the arts and belief in the arts, so thank you for that. I must preface the 15 or maybe 14 minutes I have left up here with the fact that I couldn't possibly cover adequately the issues around arts philanthropy and fundraising today, and that is not my objective either. I'm also only at the beginning of my research journey, and I see today as an opportunity to hopefully expand the circle of people who are interested in how inequity in the arts is affecting the very survival of ethnic minority artists and organizations. I am also going to say ethnic minority like 17,000 times, so brace yourself for that, okay? So in 2018, I started researching on arts philanthropy in ethnic minority communities and fundraising in ethnic minority arts organizations because I felt inadequate as an arts manager who was failing really badly in fundraising. I interviewed many artists and arts managers of ethnic minority descent and spoke to them about their fundraising journey, only to find out that every single person that I spoke to were no longer fundraising actively, save for letters to some foundations, because they, one, either didn't know how to do it and could not make the time to learn because they were already overwhelmed by responsibility, or two, had tried and failed for many years, were disheartened, and no longer believed in fundraising as an income stream. According to an August 2017 article in the Straits Times entitled "Arts Philanthropy Yet to Take Off Here," revenue from ticket sales make up only between 5 and 30% of income, and that most arts groups rely on a mix of government grants and private funding to cover costs, which essentially means that many of these ethnic minority organizations are only relying on sales and government grants. So what happens if there is one show that doesn't sell, or a grant that is not given, reduced, or not renewed? What happens during a pandemic when you can't create the way you used to, or you may not be able to apply for grants because you're not creating? How are other arts organizations able to have fundraising as a steady and sizable income stream? And why are we not turning to arts philanthropy, which historically has been a driving force for the arts the world over? A quick glance at the National Arts Council's Patron of the Arts list for the last few years will make it apparent that very few givers are of ethnic minority backgrounds. Perhaps consequently, and we will explore this later, very few are giving to arts companies which are ethnic minority focused. This phenomenon is not unique to Singapore and has been the focus of several studies which has resulted in tangible initiatives in countries such as the United States and the United Kingdom. Yet, here, there is no public data on the statistics of donors to the arts with regard to ethnic background, nor any acknowledgement of any inequity in this matter at all. In her book, Beyond Fundraising, Kay Sprinkle Grace mentions that philanthropy is directed by values, and those who give are motivated by organizations whose values advance their own values. Could these be seen as a reason why not many are giving to ethnic minority arts organizations? Another book, The Science of Giving, explores how social factors serve as barriers of giving. The researchers found that people feel that it is only culturally acceptable to donate to causes in which they have a personal stake. They studied how this may prevent people who might want to donate from doing so. For example, men might want to donate to charities that strive to empower women, but they don't feel comfortable, so they don't. Why? It's the norm of self-interest. People who lack a stake in a cause will feel uncomfortable taking action on its behalf. What then is the implication on ethnic minority arts organizations whose works may not necessarily match the values of the majority? Might artists and organizations serving other marginalized or minority populations be at a significant disadvantage in attracting meaningful sums from individuals? The main causes supported by charitable institutions here remain in the traditional sectors, such as education, health, and poverty alleviation. Research posits that, especially in Asia, philanthropy is traditionally seen as giving money to the less fortunate. Affluent individuals and families tend to make charitable contributions to improve education and alleviate local social problems like poverty, hunger, and disease. Given the fact that these sectors of charity still need a lot of attention, it comes as no surprise that the arts remain quite novel as a philanthropic cause. Much of Asia's philanthropic giving can be traced to the religiosity of its people. Concepts such as merit-making and almsgiving is still the prevalent reason for why people give. For example, in Islam, charitable giving known as zakat is one of the 5 pillars of the religion. Similar concepts exist in Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. However, this is not the only philanthropic motivation prevalent in Asia. With the burgeoning of the middle class motivated by prestige and status, visible donations become a vehicle to offer such a reputation. This is seen in corporate philanthropy, as well as where the reputation of giving in such a visible manner can in turn create business benefits. So perhaps it's not that ethnic minority-ness is the issue, but that the reach of ethnic minority arts organizations is not as extensive as others, perhaps because it's ethnic minority in nature, therefore it is an issue. I guess it's a chicken and egg problem. In the United States and the United Kingdom, it has become established that arts organizations whose main mission is to serve people of color or lower income communities face unique financial and organizational challenges, according to research by the Social Impact of the Arts Project. This means that these companies who have less resources have to do more to overcome their complex circumstances. And with the burden of representation, they not only have to think about the quality of their work and their own financial situations, but additionally, they have to think about how to reach out to their communities, how to nurture their artists, how to offer platforms on all levels, from new entrants to veterans, and all sorts of development programs as well. And as the managing director of an ethnic minority theatre company myself, I can personally share with you that this is exactly what keeps me up at night. There is this self-perpetuating cycle in that there is a general lack of opportunities in terms of looking for donors due to a lack of staff and expertise in looking for such opportunities, thus not allowing us to grow in our capacity and our reserves, which means that the company remains small and unable to look for substantial support. Again, a chicken and egg problem. This means that we are heavily reliant on arts funding granted by the government bodies, and when there are changes or even delays, we are greatly affected by them, perhaps more so than others. Initially, in talking about this, I was looking specifically at ethnicity and how it has affected philanthropy for ethnic minority arts companies. But a factor that kept turning up was class. And one of the findings of Regardless of Class by Dr. Janil Puthucheary, the chairman of OnePeople.sg, the national body promoting harmony, was that people from higher classes are likelier than those from the lower classes to participate in society by, for example, engaging in arts and cultural activities. According to the findings again, it is class, not race, not religion, that is the most divisive fault line in Singapore. A similar study by the Institute of Policy Studies on social capital in Singapore found that Singapore has shifted from a society based on race to one based also on class, and that while ethnicity and religion remain potent divisions which can't be ignored, the class divide has led to greater inequality. According to an OECD report, Singapore is listed as having the largest gap in the sense of belonging of students at school, going by their socio-economic status. It is important, however, to note the correlation between ethnicity and class. In 2004, Dr. William Keng Mun Lee of Lingnan University in Hong Kong wrote a paper entitled The Economic Marginality of Ethnic Minorities, an analysis of ethnic income inequality in Singapore, which found that occupational distribution patterns showed that Malays and Indians were disproportionately found in low-paying occupations across all industries, which has caused further ethnic income inequality over the last decades. According to Lee, present historical differences, driven by colonial policy, cultural division of labor, and late entry into the labor market, have led to the creation of barriers which have been effective in excluding Malays and Indians from some of the higher-paying occupations in Singapore. This, of course, has profound effects on the socio-economic status of the ethnic minorities in Singapore, which in turn influences their giving habits. And while it is not necessarily true that people give only within their own ethnicity, it has been shown that time and again, individuals give to causes that reflect their own realities and circumstances. In the arts, it is further purported that class plays a big factor in exposure, appreciation, willingness to participate, much less support. In deciding to approach the subject of arts philanthropy in Singapore as my area of research, I knew that there was a serious limitation in what was readily available in terms of the literature, statistics, and experts in the field. But honestly, I was not prepared for the absolute dearth of information that has greeted me at every corner. While at first doubting my research abilities, and I suppose still doubting it today, my fear is also echoed by several others whom I've interviewed. Why has it not been highlighted as an issue? A look through the boards and management of funding bodies, philanthropic and fundraising foundations and trusts, as well as institutions set up for the purpose of studying philanthropy, found nearly no ethnic minority representation. This phenomenon is not unique to Singapore, again. There is a significant lack of diversity among cultural philanthropy leaders, and that influences funding policies and distributions across the arts world. A variety of backgrounds in terms of differentiations in socioeconomic, educational, as well as professions among leaders and management could in fact increase the probability that diverse artists and art forms will be more fairly valued as well as assessed in ways that are more appropriate for their cultural and social context. The backgrounds and life experiences of the people making these decisions will affect allocations and how funds are allocated. And this is not to say that a mono-ethnic, mono-everything foundation may not value or advocate for diversity, but the absence of representation already suggests blind spots that may affect their decision-making. These leaders are the ones who will determine what sort of artists, art forms, and creative processes will receive support and resources. These are the organizations which will form relationships with individual and corporate donors, as well as trusts and foundations. These are the institutions which will be able to influence donors' views of what the cultural sector looks like and what is required to support it. Diversity is unwaveringly important in order to achieve any sort of equity in arts funding. Some may argue that many of these decisions are driven by the quality of work that these artists and arts organizations create. And of course, quality has to be an important factor in the funding of the arts, but it should not be and cannot be an absolute. The understanding of quality needs to be more fluid and take into account the artistic and/or cultural tradition that the artist or company is pursuing. It needs to take into account the relevance and impact of such works to the audience. And it may be admittedly be riskier, but if there is any sector where risk-taking and imagination are as important as virtuosity, it's the arts. Culture and art are critical components to transformation in marginalized communities. But if the evaluators and decision-makers have a standard of performance and expectation that is inconsistent with the fundamental premises and values of the organization, then the institution will always fall short in their eyes. Is there only one standard we can apply to determine a project or institution with promise? Don't we need a more imaginative set of lenses through which to look for and see transformation? How then do we approach this inequity in the arts philanthropy landscape in Singapore? I believe that the key is first and foremost, we need to acknowledge it as a problem on a national level instead of continuing the dismissive stance that we have taken thus far. We need to acknowledge that perhaps the cause of this situation is the way the arts sector has been shaped based on colonial values and traditions, reductionist CMIO approaches to our understanding of race, ethnicity, and culture, upholding certain art forms over others, and it's a pattern echoed in many countries throughout the world. We need to explore how ethnicity, class, and concentration of wealth may have made certain trends in arts philanthropy that may be hard to determine and harder still to change. Secondly, we undoubtedly need to call into question the absolute homogeneity of the management teams of important cultural institutions who shape the very foundation of philanthropy here in Singapore. And thirdly, while money is important, it's not the only factor. The inequity in arts philanthropy and in the arts scene itself will continue to worsen unless we take a step towards a systemic change. This may be in investing in diverse leaders so that more voices are heard, or engendering a change in the mindsets of funders in their understanding of the role of the arts in communities. With the current and urgent conversations throughout the world regarding the importance of representation and diversity, we are at a turning point and we need to capitalize on it. There is more understanding of the importance of supporting the cause for more diverse voices in the arts and elsewhere. A great challenge lies ahead, but I choose to see it as an opportunity to have a more honest, albeit incredibly uncomfortable conversation with the society at large. But that might bring a brand new appreciation for the importance of arts and culture and how, through its betterment, we may take strides together towards a more inclusive and equitable society as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shaza. So she has shared interesting perspectives on how to manage arts programs. So all of you here, when you want to apply for, if you want to apply for the funding, please think deeply how you can propose a good program or good product if I may call it, right? It's not easy, but I think you guys are creative enough to think of a problem or raise an issue that, you know, befits the society. All right. So you have heard from all of the 4 speakers, and I'm sure you have questions. You can ask them questions. And to help us moderate the session, I'm pleased to invite Ms. Nadia Yo, a member of the MHF board, to join the 4 speakers on stage. So please head to the stage to start the discussion now. Thank you. So for those of you who are shy, you don't want to you know, speak on the mic, there'll be a QR code on, yeah, you can scan your phones, right, and ask the question for our viewers at home as well. But, you know, we always invite you to take the mic and ask. We have mic rovers around to hand you the mic, yeah?
Thank you very much, Liana. So I'm very pleased to be here as moderator for this very esteemed panel. You know, I was really inspired hearing every single one of the speakers share earlier about their respective fields of interest and expertise, really. You know, we heard earlier Dr. Nair share about the power of the spoken and written word, right? And obviously how it can breach cultural differences, even when he was traveling in Hong Kong, for example, and meeting different people. And then we also heard Dr. Farid, who was sharing about the, you know, I think the fluidity of motion and how that evokes emotions in us. And of course, you know, how the changing cultural norms, mores, also affects how we perceive, you know, dance as an art form, right? And then we heard Dr. Wong earlier, and Dr. Wong shared a lot about the difference between multiculturalism versus interculturalism. And I think, you know, later during the panel as well, we might hear a little bit more about how that is different from assimilation, right? And then last but not least, we heard from our own Anugerah Tunas Warisan recipient, Shaza, who shared a lot about a topic that personally is close to me as well, which is arts philanthropy, right? And how, you know, the different institutions play a big role in helping, you know, institutions that maybe are less visible in society also receive their share of funding, I think. So maybe, you know, I think moderator's privilege here. I think each of you would already know that there is a QR code, and you can scan that QR code to put your questions in it. And because it's such a diverse range of topics, I have no doubt there'll be so many questions on it. But moderator's privilege, I'm going to start with the first question, just get the ball rolling, right? I'm very mindful that in these very esteemed halls, we have got many very youthful participants attending here. So perhaps my first question to all of these panelists would be really this, right? We've heard a lot about the role of corporate institutions. We've heard a lot about the role of civic society. We've also heard a lot about the role of government, right, in promoting the arts, heritage, culture. Now, what about the role of youth in promoting the arts, heritage, and culture? What role can youth play in, you know, helping to perpetrate it for the future? If I could maybe just start with, you know, Dr. Mark, since you started first.
So currently, I teach at SOTA in literary arts, and so I'm definitely in contact with people in this age group. And what I'm heartened by is a continued interest to pursue art. You know, these students in SOTA they could go to other IB schools, but they choose to go to SOTA because they have an interest in an art form, and they really work very hard. At least I know my writers work very hard, and they know that they may not end up becoming famous, but they work because they have an interest and they have a desire to be better. And my job really is to facilitate that ability, to grow that ability, and to give them the tools they need. When I was growing up, I never had that opportunity as a writer. I didn't really have a mentor. I was self-taught. And so I think these students of mine are very, very privileged. And I think by extension, you too here, by being privy to this wealth of information this morning, you are indeed privileged. So yes, what do you do now with that? Find your niche, find your interests, go deep, look for people. You know, we live in such a connected society. It's easy to reach out to people, find groups, but don't be passive. You've got to go out there, and there are like-minded people out there, other youths, other leaders, other mentors who will help you grow.
Thank you very much. And then maybe, I pass it over to Ms. Shaza as well, because I understand you've been running Theatre Ekamatra for really long, but your start in it also stemmed from your schooling days. So maybe if you could share, what you think the role of youth would be.
I actually started at Ekamatra when I was 17 years old, during one of the inter-tertiary competitions that the company had. And then now I'm 33 and still running the company, so I am so heartened actually by how young people these days feel feel incredibly empowered to speak their mind. When they see injustices, they talk about it, whether on social media or in real life, right? And I feel a lot for that, because when I was younger, I felt really scared. It took me a really long time to feel confident to point out things that were happening to me or others, because I felt that there was very little space for that conversation. And I feel like now conversations are opening up about anything and everything, and it's all because the young people are participating in it. So I think keep on keeping on. That's what I want to say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And then, I know on Slido, so there is this, if I could maybe just check before I go on to the questions Slido, the other two panelists, Dr. Wong, Dr. Do you have any other thoughts on this, on the role of youths?
I think when I first started pushing for, or at least advocating for an appreciation of what I do, my form, I think I was young. And I felt that I did some mistakes, and I was willing to learn from it. And also at the same time, it felt necessary, again, I echo the words of both my other panelists who have shared, that it was necessary that we go out to get to know like-minded people. It was through, spending time with other people from other nations, for example. And having had experience living overseas, I had to deal with issues of Islamophobia, issues of Asian hate. And these were things that made me think about, my life being in Singapore and how very privileged I've lived. And it felt necessary then to think about ways in which we could also share very important issues through the art, through my art. So that was definitely something which I felt that youth can do to constantly push boundaries and to speak up when necessary.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Wong, yourself?
Right, I guess I feel compelled to speak from a more Chinese perspective here. I think, if I use the word, the Chinese community in Singapore would, of course, be the more privileged group. So I think the challenge for the youth here may be to think a lot more about the wider community in Singapore. But I don't really think that we should push everything to them, because it's also our duty as adults to educate them, to open their minds. So we need more structures, we need more programs in the education system where they can think about different issues of like class, gender, ethnicity, and like I said, I feel that in Singapore we always tend to segregate our subjects. Like we have Chinese studies in the university along with Malay studies, South Asian studies, and so on. And there's no intercultural studies. Of course, we can park that under cultural studies, but that isn't like a compulsory subject by any means. I think we need to think maybe harder on how to incorporate such content in your education system.
Thank you very much. So what I'm hearing is that, you know, there could be possibly a relook or review of, you know, how the education, youth are educated on understanding intercultural values. And then also I heard, you know, the fact that perhaps in Singapore, our youth are already rather privileged because in being here in this halls, you know, in SOTA, for example, or in LaSalle, I understand you're a lecturer there as well, you know, there are already these opportunities to also engage in the arts and to, you know, experience different forms in which heritage and culture can be perpetrated. I'm going to just move on to a question that has popped up in the Slido. So Dr. Wong, it's good that you're holding on to that mic because on Slido there is a question about cultural appropriation. So earlier you shared about the brown face incident on, I think, where there was a performance that was put up by an artist. And I think the person had, you know, tried to pretend to be a member of the different ethnic group here. So, you know, if you could maybe share a little bit. So the question was, when is cultural appropriation ever okay? Okay, I think my argument in the entire presentation was that actually I should have also highlighted a different word, which is cultural borrowing, which sounds more positive, right? Because it's like maybe I should consult other fellow panelists. For example, are there not elements in Malay music and dance that have been borrowed from the Chinese or Portuguese, right?
Yes, there are hybrid syncretized versions. For example, the joget is Portuguese, and also zapin is from the Arabs.
Yes. So if you think even further, like Buddhism, for example, is central to the identity of a lot of Chinese, and that of course came from India, but not only the religion itself. There were like traditions in storytelling that came from India. Well, the very popular story of Journey to the West, for example, featured this monkey king. Now, of course, we have in Ramayana, that's so popular in Southeast Asia, this character of Hanuman. Of course, monkey king wasn't directly like borrowed from the figure of Hanuman, but we can't deny that some of these ideas must have like sort of come together with existing folklore in China.
So it's the idea of cultural borrowing as opposed to appropriation.
Yes. So
the
issue I think is when, for example, you adopt the costumes of a different ethnicity, and you do it for your own glamour, without respecting the sensibilities, right? For example, there are people who wear images of Hindu deities.
Yep.
I think there was some issues sometime back when they use it for shoes, right?
No, absolutely. I agree with you. And I like that idea of sensitivities, right? Because earlier as well, Dr. Nair talked about this Bukit Kasih, and how at the Bukit Kasih, you know, you've got 5 different houses of prayers, you know, all of which are respectful of the sensitivities of each of the different faiths and cultures.
So
and
I think also the issue of how one is benefiting from such borrowing
Yep.
without acknowledging. So the example I cited was like Peranakan nasi lemak, right? Every time you add a label, Peranakan, and then the price goes up. So yeah, I think I wouldn't blame people for feeling that, yeah, what does that really mean, right?
Understand. Thank you. And then maybe, if I could just, I'm looking at time actually, and I'm very mindful that we are a little bit over time. So maybe if I could just wrap up this session with a last question that's also popped up, and I think it's very fitting that it's also a question that Minister had earlier, poetically perhaps started this session with, which is really this, right? How can we, through all of these different diverse art forms, and our respective areas of appreciation for heritage and culture, whether it's in dance or in the spoken word or in theater or in whatever cultures really, how can we create that common identity to kind of carry us into the future, to carry Singapore into the future? If I could maybe start with yourself, Shaza, and then we go around in circle, okay?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
No worries. So how can we use different art forms, perhaps, to create this common identity, this common Singapore identity, to carry us into the future?
For me, I think theatre and stories in general is about sharing, and art is about sharing for me. And I feel like that is the driving, like it could be used as a transformational and driving force for the sort of changes that we want in the community, in the society, in countries. And I think we need to be able to harness that power with young people as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then if you could just pass the mic. And
Right. I think when we talk about common identity, it's also important to look at the context in which we choose to identify with a particular identity. Hence, it's also important to have a very nuanced understanding of our own histories and where and how we've come to become the people that we are. In knowing that, then do we appreciate better the need for a common identity, and for what Liana also shared again just now about the universality of humanity.
thank you.
Okay, I agree that understanding of our history is very important, because if you look back in history, there was an idea of like maybe creating something that's unique in Singapore's dance, for example. I think back in the days of National Theatre in the 70s. And of course, nothing much came out of it. So we must learn from from what happened in the past. And what we should do is to do wider and deeper historical research so that we know what has been done before and not pretend that everything we see today is new and like 1,000 shows at the theater a year and then we forget about them, right?
Thank you very much, Dr. Wong.
Yeah.
I fully agree. It's it's that understanding, isn't it, of lessons learned from the past and then bringing it into the future.
Yes. I also want to say that when we talk about creating a common identity, we must bear in mind that Singapore is also a global city. So we should not create something to exclude others, right? You can't say that, Singlish represents our identity. So if you hear other people who do not speak Singlish and say, you are a foreigner.
Oh,
right?
absolutely, you're right. And maybe last but not least, Dr. Nair, if you could just pass the mic over, Dr. Wong. Just very quickly now, what are your thoughts on this?
Okay, very quickly. I know it's been a really dense morning. When all of us here on stage were growing up, we had textbooks. And everything was contained in the textbook. And you study it from the textbook. You memorize the textbook. Nowadays, students don't have textbooks. The world is your textbook. Knowledge is online. It is almost infinite. It's exponential. It is a challenge. I see that all the time. How do we harness all of that? How do you take all of that knowledge, whether it's in the arts or economy or everything, how do you bring that home into yourself? How do you create an identity that is local and yet global, that sits at the intersection of so many things? I have no answer for you. If you thought I was leading up to some grand revelation, no, I don't have that answer. It is something that, it is very exciting because you figure it out for yourself. We are now in the age of Web3, and that is decentralized economies and knowledge sharing platforms. That is your generation, that is your future. I want to see what you guys do with that.
So I suppose on that very hopeful note about, youths really being the future and then taking the lead on how the Singapore identity of the future will probably look like, I suppose we'll wrap up this particular panel. Thank you very much, everyone. Please join me in thanking them.
Thank you, Ms. Nadia Yo and our panelists. May we invite you back to your seats. Understand that Minister will have to leave soon. So without further ado, we would like to have the session to present the tokens of appreciation to first our speakers. So may we invite our guest of honor, Minister Edwin Tong, and MHF Chairman, Dr. Noshari Saad, on stage, please. Okay, so first, may we invite Dr. Mark Nair on stage. Next, we have Dr. Noramin Farid. Next, we have Dr. Wong Chi Meng. We have now Ms. Shaza Ishaq. Next, we have a special gift to our Andika Warisan donor, Temasek Foundation. So may we invite Mr. Lim Hock Chuan, Head of Programs, Temasek Foundation, on stage to receive his token of appreciation, please. On this gift, the word Temasek is written in a different form of Arabic font type, which has been spelt using the same spelling found in the Sejarah Melayu. Next, we would like to present a token of appreciation to our community partner, 4PM. May we invite Mr. Rahmat Nazri Shukur, Honorary Secretary General, 4PM, on stage, please. And finally, we also have a special gift for you, Minister. It's your names spelt in the Arabic font known as Hufik Muruba, a font that has existed since 8 AD but has a very minimalist and modern outlook which is appealing even today. Thank you, Minister Tong and Dr. Nosharil. Thank you for attending this event. Thank you. Okay, so now we will be looking at the special project that is launched today, right? I think just now Julina already mentioned some details on it. So let's look at the, this slide it's filled with a lot of information, right? So know that, yeah, I see, I am very good, take picture, right? But I think the information will be shared, can be shared with you also after the event, yeah? So what do, right? Gather your friends, 5 to 10 people. Remember, it has to be a group of different backgrounds, yeah? Different ethnic backgrounds, different genders, etc., right? And think of something, an idea that you want to work on, right? It has to be based on the theme. The theme for this year is Multicultural Singapore Beyond CMIO, right? So what does social cohesion looks like to you? How can it be better nurtured in Singapore? What would you do differently from what and how it is being presented today or being taught to you today? You can present your ideas in the form of shorts, videos, visual and performance arts, pop-up exhibitions, and so on. So in your own institutions, in your own area of study, right? Make use of that and connect to the wider issue that you see today in Singapore, right? And 2 of the most interesting, innovative, and meaningful ideas will be awarded $2,500 each project, not each person, each project, and the chance to turn your imagination into reality, and your final work will be shared in the next round of Sembang Ilmu Plus Plus, right? So it's not easy, it's not an easy task, but I'm sure it will be interesting to see your ideas, yeah? And I think there'll be a QR code, right, after this? Yeah, so you can scan it now and look at the information that it's provided online. Don't worry if you have other friends outside of this hall today that you think will be interested, you can share with them also, right? We encourage you to share this proposal to your other friends as well, all right? So now, I hope you have had time to scan the QR codes here. Okay, all right. So now we will have a special treat, a spoken word performance by Dr. Mark Nair. Anybody knows here what is a spoken word? Raise up your hand. Come on lah, y'all don't know what spoken word? No, or don't know? No, right? I trust that you know. Okay, now we would like to invite Dr. Mark Nair to perform his spoken word. A warm round of applause, please.
Okay, hello again. It has been a very rich morning, and I will not try to tax you so much intellectually, so just think about this. And it is kind of technically spoken word because I'm performing the poems, but it is not pure spoken word because I changed tack, and I decided, because my talk was called I'll Be a Mirror, and these, at least the first 3 poems, are mirrors of what I raised in my talk, poetic mirrors, so to speak. So the first poem is the poem that I wrote when I was in transit in Hong Kong. So it's called Gate 26. The arch vaults across tarmac, connecting terminals beyond the glass walls of Gate 26. Airplanes taxi to and fro, ocean liners steaming to port. Grounded, the airplane is a lumbering beast, fragile
prone to a brushed wingtip, a faulty gangway. Each maneuver attains the delicacy of an operation, but in the air it is confident, bends the laws of gravity with the certainty of a traveler heading home. And we are here for the length of time it takes to cross the arch, the transit through security from arrivals to departure, returning to gate 26. The airplane has never left the gate, and we have never really gone anywhere, unable to change who we are, though we often find ourselves between breaths, ghost notes that play in the turbulence, songs of driftwood that keep airplanes in the air as they curve under the stars, forever passing between light and dark. Poetry, for me, often has a very socially connected element. And this poem is called Lorry. I wrote this very recently because there were a series of fatal accidents involving migrant workers in lorries, and they were flung out of lorries. And there was this push to transport workers in buses. But one of the reasons given was that there's not enough buses because there are 280,000 migrant workers in Singapore. We don't have enough buses. So the compromise was to install speed management devices on the vehicles. So this poem speaks as a lorry. My body is a lorry in need of paint, plangent motor juddering against street lights and double yellow lines where I should not be waiting. My battery, with its rusty leads that start well before sunrise, offers revolutions along the road from the dormitory beyond the trees. The dial for the radio somewhere between sternum and rib, blueprint for the condominium with its penthouse pool inside my big toe. I am someone's subcontract, a licensed plate in the dominion of unnamed billionaires. When I run out of petrol, they never admit I run off petrol. Today, another body crashes into me. I break open, smaller bodies tumble blood and bone, brittle without their yellow safety. Because this is not a construction site. This is skin that offers passage. I want to bind them to my body. The way I hold down crates and beams and furniture for mortgaged dreams, double, triple snagged around me. But softer bodies have no right to safety. They are flung the way a god hurls stars into galaxies. When I come to, I am not facing sky but the tarmac, warm even at night. The heat from so many bodies pressed against a surface that keeps its silence. Perhaps you should sit on me too, should feel every bump and break, should not be underwritten by anything than money owed for years to an agent. You should speak with calloused voices and hold up small screens with your babies waving back against traffic. And I would gladly carry those bodies back to their dormitories. I talked to you about Bukit Kasih, and this is the poem I wrote about it. Bukit Kasih, the Hill of Love. A tourist is half pilgrim, half ghost, haunting sulfuric slopes until the perfect image is taken. Dip your feet into venting pools with traces of hell that steam in its envy of heights or what faith aspires to, while just beneath lies folk magic for brown belief, closer to the land or numbers for the next lottery. Remember, a blooming sarai may bring a person great luck, and the bitterness of the papaya leaf wards off sorcery. To climb the hill, walk backwards. Remove all your clothing, one button at a time. Keep the leaves on. Keep the candle from dripping into nostrils. Sit with other bodies, other stories. Listen. The way down the hill mimics stations of the cross, steep and winding, with steps that twist ankles and question your desire. And at the bottom of the hill, food stalls with corn and eggs boiled in hot springs await. One more poem for you all. This one is slightly more lighthearted. I thought I shouldn't end with something too heavy. And it's a poem that celebrates language, the power of language, and the need for language. It's called The Language Hospital. Are you always reduced to silence? Do you suffer from diseases of the letter? If you get into a word-related accident, do you know where to go for help? Sometimes we all have to visit the language hospital. The doctors are poets, and the nurses, well, the nurses will be their muses. Because the poets are physicians of language, they should get paid for all the ironic incisions, blank verse bandages, and parodic prescriptions of words they provide. But before patients get to see the poet, they have to go through triage to test the brain, heart, and lungs. Describe how the sun would feel if he stopped burning up. Fill in the blank. Your hand and mind beats as certain as. Now, breathe in slowly and try to breathe out a metaphor. Those in critical condition, incoherent, at a loss for words, will be sent to the emergency room if it's a heart attack, a searing pain from a lack of punctuation, a clogged vocabulary of ventricles, if it's a stroke, a reduction to monosyllables, a paralysis of reason, rush them into the operating theater. An adrenaline shot of pure alphabet will keep them alive. At the language hospital, there are procedures to remove tumors of words turned into themselves, diseased and ugly, throbbing from badly used tenses or bloated syntax. And for those who have exhausted their word count, the hospital resuscitates a spluttering heart with a word transfusion, a grammar beyond A, B, and O. Patients will resuscitate their words with originality until they can speak without the aid of a dictionary or a thesaurus. And let's not forget the therapy room for first date failures, gushing, "You look pretty hot." Might have worked when you're in kindergarten, but not when you're 16, or at least it should be accompanied by a description of beauty by seashores and evening light, of our pastel youth made from laughter and stars. When patients have stabilized and their word count is back to normal, we test your reflexes by making you write a haiku about the frogs in the pond outside. And there's also a fully stocked gift shop with bouquets of flowery phrases, premium smooth chocolate words in expensive boxes for relatives who have forgotten to bring even sympathy along. So, if you don't want to visit the language hospital, watch your words wisely. Keep them from a state of emergency. Spell in full. Exercise your vocabulary. Read a balanced diet, but always leave space for poetry. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Nair. That was a very interesting performance of spoken word. I'm not sure about you, but when I was like, I was really imagining that language hospital that he was describing earlier. All right, so now, before we close, let's welcome back Akmal and Renta Collective for a special performance featuring poems as well. First, Pelarian dan Bulan Retak, poem by A. Salam. Second one is Panas Dua Tipa, not Dua Lipa, Dua Tipa, poem by Mas. The Sneeze, poem by Edwin Tambu. Harus Berdiri, poem by Akmal. Langkah by Masuri SN. Masa Lampau dan Masa Kini, Yunos Sasa. And Anak Keramat Seribu Doa by Asmin.
Di sebuah daerah perbatasan, Ada bulan retak-retak pecah, berceracak merah di wajah, di pangkal jalan berpisah. Berkerat rotan, padam lampu jiwa, meraba-raba. Meraba-raba akan teman yang hilang, kebebasan di unggun api, kemerdekaan di kelambu hitam. Dicarik-carik mengerikan, dengan tangis menyiram jalan, kekusutan silih berganti. Lalu kaki membawa perpisahan. Di hujung pelangi bersumpah akan segala kecacatan, puncak daerah dihulur talak. Panasku, panas memarah bara. Panasmu, panas melegak darah. Bara membahang, cita menyala. Darah merangsang, marah menjara. Jika kedua panas berimbang, nescaya dunia kita sandang. Jika panas kita bertentang, pasti kita sama kecundang. Pasti kita sama kecundang. Panasku panas memarah bara. Panasku panas melegak darah. Bara membahang, cita menyala. Darah merangsang, merah menjara. Jika kedua panas berimbang, nescaya dunia kita sandang. Jika panas kita bertentang, pasti kita sama kecundang. Jika panas kita berimbang, nescaya dunia kita tenang. Jika panas kita bertentang, pasti kita sama. Oh, sama kecundang. Sama kecundang. Terima kasih. Baiklah. Now I'd like to invite once again, Fasola with me on stage. A round of applause for Fasola.
That hawker there, selling mee and kway teow, is prosperous, round, quick moving. With practiced grace, he blows his nose, twigs it dexterously, secures complete evacuation, then proceeds to comply with the slogans, the injunctions on the need to.
Singapore clean. Keep Singapore jump free. Keep Singapore, keep Singapore, keep Singapore clean.
By wiping his fingers thoroughly on his apron, he's not going to dirty the drains, clutter the spittoons. He obeys the law, he obeys the law, he obeys the law. Deals with his goal seriously.
Keep Singapore clean.
Keep Singapore clean.
Keep Singapore jump free. Keep Singapore, keep Singapore, keep Singapore clean.
If you sneeze after a meal of mee or kway teow, it is really the steaming hot soup, the chilies and pepper that discomfort you. By wiping his fingers thoroughly on his apron, he is not going to dirty the drains, clutter the spittoons. He obeys the law, deals with his goal seriously.
Keep Singapore jump free. Keep Singapore, keep Singapore, keep Singapore clean.
If you sneeze after a meal of mee or kway teow, it is really a steaming hot soup, the chilies and pepper that discomfort you.
Keep Singapore clean. Ah.
Harus Berdiri by Akmal N. Harus berdiri aku di mana lagi kalau bukan di lorong sepi, berbalut noda tersiram air dusta. Bertahun lama telah kau agihkan udara tiap ceruk pantai dan kota lama. Kau siapkan siapa di mana. Kini telah sampai banjir, harus ku undur, memandang belakang, melihat jalan, memberi ruang keangkuhan, kesilapan. Harus berdiri aku di mana lagi kalau bukan di antara lorongan budi, simpang siur setia. Coba kita darahkan mati. Kini telah sampai banjir, harus ku undur, memandang belakang, melihat jalan, memberi ruang keangkuhan, kesilapan. Oh, oh, kini telah sampai banjir, harus ku undur, memandang
yang belakang melihat jalan, memberi ruang keangkuhan, kesilapan. Terima kasih. Langkah. Ku pilih langkah di antara tingkah, menyurat wajah di tengah berjuta ini. Ku teruskan menghambat langkah-langkah keramat. Langkahku tidak berturut, hidupku berlumpur-lumpur. Begini langkahku, langkah pengembara, langkah penghibah sudut 99. Ku pilih pengembara menjadi langkahku, jalannya juga jenuh mengawasi hibahku.
Langkahku, langkahku, langkahku.
Ku pilih langkah di antara tingkah, menyurat wajah di tengah berjuta ini. Ku teruskan menghambat langkah-langkah keramat. Langkahku tidak turut, hidupku berlumpur-lumpur. Begini langkahku, langkah pengembara, langkah penghibah sudut 99. Ku pilih pengembara menjadi langkahku, jalannya juga jenuh mengawasi hibahku.
Langkahku, masa lampau dan masa kini telah meraih sisa usia dalam pengejaran di saat akhirnya. Untuk apa memuja masa lampau jika hanya menimbulkan kerinduan yang memukau? Lalu engkau akan menjadi kekatu yang mati kerana kegarahan memuja cahaya yang gemerlapan. Masa lampau dan masa kini telah meraih sisa usia dalam pengejaran di saat akhirnya.
Mestinya biarkan saja masa lampau dan hadapi masa kini yang mengimbau dengan pandangan matamu yang tajam dan kegigihan yang berterusan. Biar tergenggam sebuah kenyataan dalam kehidupanmu sekarang.
Masa lampau dan masa kini telah meraih sisa usia dalam pengejaran di saat akhirnya. Masa lampau
dan masa kini telah meraih sisa usia dalam pengejaran di saat akhirnya. Oh, masa lampau dan masa kini telah meraih sisa usia dalam pengejaran di saat akhirnya. Masa lampau.
Musim pasti kan bersilir ganti dan luruh gugurkan dedaunan yang mati. Tapi ku yakin pada semua memori kan selamanya mekar di hati. Mega mendung mengundangkan hujan, lalu ku basah dengan 1000 kenangan. Andai terkandung pahit dalam suratan, ku redha dalam kerelaan. Wujudnya mentari meminjamkan terang, tercipta rembulan demi malam yang panjang. Walaupun berpergian bukan saja menghilang, bukannya erti tak sayang. Musim pasti kan bersilih ganti dan luruh gugurkan dedaunan yang mati. Tapi ku yakin pada semua memori kan selamanya mekar di hati. Wujudnya mentari meminjamkan terang, tercipta rembulan demi malam yang panjang. Walaupun berpergian bukan saja menghilang, bukannya erti tak sayang. Wujudnya mentari meminjamkan terang, tercipta rembulan demi malam yang panjang. Walaupun berpergian bukan saja menghilang, bukannya erti tak sayang.
Thank you. Terima kasih. I have Akmal, this is Dayat, Nurin and also Faris. They are Fasola, and see you once again next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Akmal and Fasola, for the amazing performance. Can we give them another round of applause, please? We have now come to the end of the Sembang Ilmu Plus session. Thank you to everyone who came here today, to our youths who make up actually majority of the auditorium today. Before we call it a day, I'd like to invite everyone to scan the following QR code to share with us your feedback. I'll leave the screen for a while. Yeah. Please help us by giving your feedback for this session. All right, so to everyone, today, again, I would like to repeat that the launch of the special project is for you guys here to think about ideas, think about things that you like to do to inspire or to send a message to your friends out there, right? Through your projects, through your programs or whatsoever. So please go back, don't sit on it, gather your friends, whoever it may be, right? And discuss, yeah? Brainstorm ideas, and the MHF look forward to look at all your proposals, and of course, they cannot award everybody. It's only 2 proposals. Therefore, you guys have to be creative and, you know, put your best ideas into it, yeah? All right? So stay tuned for more programs by the MHF. We also have a lot of online discussions that are live streamed on MHF's Facebook and also YouTube. Yeah, you may also subscribe to our newsletters. Once again, thank you to everybody, to our chairman, our vice chairman, our board of members here, Prof. Hadijah Rahmat. Also, just now we had Madam Rahayu Mazam with us earlier. Right? Thank you for joining us this morning. It's afternoon now. And we hope to see everyone again. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you.